This is a conversation starter on culture. One of the most important things that we'll ever do in our life, if we're leading an organization, if we're leading a family, if you have a business, if you have a church, is to create the culture. In fact, what you hear a lot in the sports world, when a new coach is hired, or perhaps a team is sold to a new owner, one of the first things that they'll address is the culture. It's the same in business. Whenever you have a new leader take over at any level, one of the first things that they're going to do is address the culture. But exactly what is a culture? And how do you define a culture? And then if you define it, can we even change it? And those are all very important questions. Now, the culture is not the vision, but it is the environment that lets that vision grow. Culture is not a strategy, but it is the environment in which those strategies are executed. Culture is not community, but it is the bonds that are created between the people who make up the community. So yes, culture is important, and maybe one of the first things that we have to address is the culture. Well, what is a culture? Where did the idea of a culture come from? And how about the word culture? And I think the word culture contains some of the elements that help us define it, because it's the same word where we get our term cultivate. So a culture is a cultivated space. Well, that's interesting because that connects us back to the Garden of Eden. And so if you think about the Garden of Eden, what was it? It was a garden. It was a paradise. It was a walled off section of earth that was different than the rest. It had been separated. Now, when you think of the bigger picture of creation, from the time that God spoke into the chaos, He began to separate things. For instance, He separated light from darkness. Then He separated land from water. Then He separated water into salt and fresh. On the land, He separated that which was mineral from that which grew out of it life, plant life, and then animal life. Then He separated from the animal life and created Adam, and even Adam He separated to create Eve. And so God separates a particular plot of land, calls it a garden. It's cultivated, therefore it has a culture. And then from there, that culture was to spread across the face of the earth. Okay, well then, exactly what do we do in a culture to either form it or change it? Well, I think we go back to the organic setting of the garden. We go back to nature to try to figure this out. So if there's a garden, or if there's a farmer that's going to farm land, they choose a piece of land and they begin to plow up and work the earth deliberately and intentionally, because cultures don't naturally form into a good thing. In fact, one could even make an argument, because of the work of Satan on earth and the fall of humanity, that cultures will kind of naturally and organically emerge as sinful and selfish. And so part of what we are to do is to create a kingdom culture, a walled-off paradise, a garden, a piece of land that we work in order to grow fruit that is different than what grows outside that garden. The demarcation line. This is cultivated, that is not. And therein lies some of the first essential elements of a culture. Number one, that you have to work a culture deliberately, intentionally, and you work that culture based on the fruit that you want to bear. You have to have something in mind. You have to have a goal in mind, and then you backtrack in the backlight of that vision of what you want to produce, and then you create this culture that's going to support it. The first thing that we do in culture is draw the line to say, we don't do that, but we do this. That's what God did in the garden when He said, don't eat of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. He was creating the taboo. And in creating the taboo, what naturally was created on its opposite is what we do. That's the tree of life. Here's what we do. That's what we don't do. And one of the first things that you establish in a culture are the taboos. What are the taboos? The taboos are the limits. You may have freedom within the garden, but just beyond that limit, we have moved from our culture into the chaos. And things grow out in the chaos. Nature is an example of the chaos, but we are creating a culture. We work the ground. We do it deliberately and intentionally. The first thing that we do in its basic form is separate the taboo from that which we do. It is the unacceptable from the acceptable. And so we make that line of demarcation. So what you're doing is deliberately, intentionally, purposefully creating this culture like a farmer works the land, plants the seeds, nurtures and cares for it for an intended fruit. Now we'll talk more about this in the next video. But at least for now, we can get this conversation started.